forces that brought this division, this polarization of the country. From the American point of view, it's simply a button, a leverage point to use to excite the Russians and go after the Russians. And so I would be very worried if I was anybody in the world, a citizen, that the United States is going to use this Ukraine thing at any moment to push towards a hot war.
The whole world is watching you. That's a fact. They're watching you because their hopes for your success.
Do you think that was a plan of the Wall Street people, of the Western people, where they wanted to make Ukraine a dumping ground?
You know, I don't even have to speculate about it. I'm sure of it. At the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, many experts reasonably included Ukraine in the top 10 of the most developed countries in the world. Starting positions of the independent Ukraine were impressive. 1/3 of the whole USSR industry, the largest Black Sea shipping company in the world, rocket, aviation, and space industry. As a result, after reckless economic reforms, after breakdown of economic relations with Russia and other post-Soviet countries, Ukraine had a failure. Since independence, its economy has shrunk by 1/3, ahead of the poorest countries in Europe. After 2014, Ukraine took a sharp turn towards decommunization. Memories of the Soviet time fade one by one. But, together with the monuments, Ukraine is parting with its industrial grandeur.
Okay, what happens? So Wall Street people make money on this? Does Ukraine become a junk bond? Do they trade the future of Ukraine on the stock market?
Ukraine, as part of the Soviet Union, was the largest republic in the production of locomotives and diesel locomotives. Deindustrialization in Ukraine led to the fact that we now purchase these diesel locomotives from the United States of America. Who benefits, Mr. Stone? This is beneficial to those who today are lobbying illegal methods, affecting economic integration, the sale of their products. 5 years after the Revolution of Dignity, suddenly it became clear to everyone the West is not going to open its sales markets to Ukraine. Nobody needed to have unexpected competitors. It was much more profitable to force the Ukrainians to eliminate their potential. Ukraine used to be one of the few countries that could produce aircraft carriers. Now there is no shipbuilding in Ukraine. Ukraine used to create space rockets. Now it has no space industry, no aircraft industry. Ukraine doesn't have its own automotive industry. The military-industrial complex once brought up to $3 billion annually to the budget. Today, most of the enterprises are closed. Some of the enterprises are located in territory not controlled by Kiev. Naturally, to say that today we are trying to export these products, these amounts are insignificant, which, of course, cannot come close to what it was before. Because the less we produce, the more we will purchase. That this is one of the elements of this external expansion. An external management that Washington has introduced in relation to Ukraine since 2014.
It was fantastic.
Another amazing experiment over common sense was the coal scam. Ukraine, which has rich coal deposits in the Donbass, has suddenly turned from an exporter into an importer of coal. It seems that in Kiev and Washington, they agreed to give a new meaning to the saying, to carry coal to Newcastle. After the start of the conflict in the Donbass, Kiev definitely refused to buy Donetsk coal and decided to replace it with imported coal from the USA and South Africa. It was possible to buy it in Russia, but the politics took over. The second example, Pennsylvanian coal is much more expensive than Russian coal, and it is more expensive than coal from South Africa. And can you imagine the difference in transportation logistics? Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine and the United States of America, and Ukraine and South Africa. At the same time, today we buy 63% of coal imports from Russia. And we already buy 30% of all imported coal from the United States of America. Is this not the result of what you ask about? Is it not the result of who benefits? Who does it? Those who benefit from the sale of their products in Ukraine. In order to avoid domestic production, so that the country from the manufacturer turned into the country of the acquirer and the buyer. That's what the benefit is.
Is there any oil, gas? There's nothing here.
You know, we have oil and gas everywhere, but we do not produce it. It needs to be developed. Therefore, Ukraine is rich in resources. But resources require investments that must be made in the economy of Ukraine in order to extract these minerals. But the situation with the investment and investment climate in the country is extremely bad. The economy is not developing. The investment climate has not been created. There is pressure from the administrative resource. Raider seizure of business. The lack of a fair judicial system. So who would invest? However, there were brave people who decided to invest in Ukrainian oil. The attention of world media is attracted by one company, Burisma Holdings. There are very, very interesting people on the board of directors of Burisma. For example, Hunter Biden is the son of the Vice President of the United States. Of course, this state of affairs is welcome, but one detail interferes. The son of the U.S. Vice President received his post almost immediately after the official visit of his father to Ukraine, in the light of obvious interest of Biden Sr. in everything that is happening in Ukraine.
Ex-Vice President Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden has a deal in Ukraine. Explain that. Yes. His son was and remains on the board of directors of one of the companies that is engaged in oil and gas production in Ukraine. So this also explains the economic interests of the Biden family. Not only the son, but probably his high-ranking father as well. Perhaps this was precisely what allowed Mr. Biden, when he was as curator, when he was in power, curator from the side of Washington in Ukraine, he actually behaved like a person representing not only the country that introduced external management, but it was a representative or leader of the metropolis in relation to the colony, where the colony was, unfortunately, my country. And his speech in the parliament, I remember it very well.
Thank you very much.
It was not just instructive. It was a speech in which he said what to do and how to do it. And when stating his position, he didn't base it on argument or explanation, but on the fact that this decision was made somewhere overseas.
The Office of the General Prosecutor desperately needs reform. The judiciary should be overhauled. The energy sector needs to be competitive, ruled by market principles, not sweetheart deals.
And you, the so-called legislature, before whom he speaks, should implement this policy.
Ukraine needs a budget that's consistent with your IMF commitments. Anything else will jeopardize Ukraine's hard-won progress and drive down the support for Ukraine from the international community, which is always tenuous.
On March 22, 2019, Ukrainian politicians from the opposition, Viktor Medvedchuk and Yuri Boyko, met in Moscow with Prime Minister Medvedev. It was about the conclusion of a new gas contract between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the transit of gas through its territory. Interestingly, on behalf of Ukraine, negotiations were not conducted by officials, but it could not have been otherwise. Until 2014, Ukraine was almost completely dependent on Russian supplies. However, due to disputes over the price of gas, as well as for political reasons, Ukraine does without direct gas supplies from the Russian Federation. In fact, as Ukrainian politicians themselves have already recognized, in the reverse mode. Through the special schemes, the same gas is purchased from Gazprom's supplies to the EU, but through European intermediaries, for example, through Poland. As a result, over 4 years, the price of gas for the population increased by 1,079%. That is the price citizens of Ukraine have to pay for fictitious gas independence. And then, a bilateral economic war began. The thing is that Ukraine joined the EU sanctions against Russia, and Russia imposed counter-sanctions against Ukraine. And this dealt another crushing blow to the economic abilities of selling Ukraine's products to the markets of Russia and the CIS countries. Fortunately, has not found a replacement for these markets.
And 30% of the budget goes to pay the debt.
Это нагрузки финансовые.
These are financial burdens that even a normal economy cannot withstand, let alone a state that is in deep crisis.
Щороку з України виїжджає приблизно 1 мільйон громадян.
I want to tell you that along with deindustrialization, we are still in a process that the authorities and our media do not notice. This is another process. It is called de-intellectualization. Why? This is due to the harmful negative educational system introduced in Ukraine. This is due to the lack of scientific and technical development today because science and the introduction of new technologies is not actually financed in the country. And naturally, the brain drain goes along the line of finding use for these brains. Deindustrialization led to the closure of tens of thousands of large and medium-sized enterprises. And after that, people were looking for work. And today, they are looking for it in Russia, in Poland, in Europe. They left because they couldn't financially support their families in Ukraine.
I set up the foundation in Ukraine in 1990, which was 2 years before the independence of Ukraine.
Where does George Soros figure in all this?
К сожалению, везде.
Unfortunately, everywhere. If we talked about some positive results from the activities of this gentleman,
Этого господина, то надо было...
then we should have noted some success.
Его деятельность направлена в основном...
But his activity is mainly focused on those countries where he took an active position with his various funds.
Мы помним
We remember the countries in North Africa where the Arab Spring happened. Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt. We remember the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. We remember the Rose Revolution in Georgia. We remember the Orange Revolution in 2004. And finally, the consequences of not only the Orange Revolution, but also the Revolution of Dignity of 2013 and 2014. This is also his activity. He did not stop. He continued to operate in 2015 and 2016.
The Russians were successful. They accomplished what they set out to do. They had an objective to sow discord and divisiveness within our society at large and to help Donald Trump, and they succeeded.
The biggest mistake people make when talking about the Trump-Russia collusion, sort of MSNBC Russiagate narrative.
The Kremlin offered dirt to the Trump campaign. The president's campaign said yes to that offer. That's no longer an open question. All that stuff has now been proven.
They think that it started election night 2016. In fact, it's part of a much longer series of events. When Barack Obama was elected,
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
Hillary Clinton comes in as Secretary of State.
I just wanted to have a chance to publicly say thank you. I think Hillary will go down as one of the finest Secretaries of States we've had.
And at that point, she sets up a private email system. I think now it's pretty clear that part of what was going on is they were setting up the underpinnings that would set up the Maidan. She introduced a program called Civil Society 2.0.
And what we've done with Secretary Clinton's Civil Society 2.0 program is we've taken one of America's undeniable strengths, the strength of our technology and of our innovators, and we've put them to work in service of our diplomatic goals.
This is a way for the U.S. government to work directly with NGOs like International Renaissance, funded by George Soros. And while working with those NGOs, fund money to them, but also training, and the kind of training that would be used when the Maidan would start.
I'm the Ukrainian, the native of Kiev, and now I'm on Maidan. I want you to know why thousands of people all over my country are on the streets.
The direct involvement of this we don't know anything about because Hillary Clinton's emails were all hidden from us. That Civil Society 2.0 program shows that they understand that cyber technology, that smartphones, that all of that technology, the tactics of activism were changing.
Скандал
The scandal that has become well known throughout the world, which for some reason is called Russia's intervention in the US presidential election, erupted in Ukraine.
They're calling it the digital equivalent of 9/11.
A new report from the U.S. intelligence community says that Putin and the Russian government conspired to help President-elect Donald Trump's election chances.
This is an electronic Watergate.
Russia did not help me.
The FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election.
Obviously, Russia's been accused over and over again of interference in the 2016 election.
Я и тогда не вмешивался, сейчас не хочу вмешиваться и в будущем.
But now in the U.S. there's been investigation about Ukraine's interference in the election. It was a very confusing situation. Poroshenko seems to have been very strongly pro-Clinton, anti-Trump.
Ну да, здесь секрета никакого.
Do you think there was interference?
Я не думаю, что это можно трактовать как вмешательство со стороны украинского государства. Они исходили из того, что госпожа Клинтон победит, и все делали для того, чтобы продемонстрировать свою лояльность будущим американским властям. Вот это действительно ничего такого особенного нет. Пытались создать уже благоприятное о себе мнение у будущего президента. Поэтому они позволяли себе нелицеприятные выражения в отношении Трампа и всячески поддерживали демократов. Это никакой секрета никакого нет. Они почти публично действовали.
For some reason, we are talking about the interference of Russia, associated primarily with the former campaign chairman of the then presidential candidate, Donald Trump, Mr. Paul Manafort. In this scandal, which erupted in Ukraine, he played an organizational and ideological function.
Let's talk about this new reporting from the New York Times this morning about Paul Manafort and his dealings in the Ukraine.
In order to organize this scandal, to discredit the presidential candidate and his campaign, which he actually managed, Mr. Manafort was removed from power of the head of staff.
Last August, a jury convicted Manafort of 8 felonies, including tax and bank fraud. 1 month later, he pleaded guilty to 2 more counts of conspiracy and agreed to cooperate with the Russia investigation in exchange for a lighter sentence.
Paul Manafort, he was consulting with the Party of Regions.
The Party of Regions is a political party of Ukraine created in late 1997 that then grew to be the biggest party of Ukraine between 2006 and 2014.
So Andrew Kramer publishes a story in the New York Times about Paul Manafort's name being found in this black ledger.
Sergei Lushenko is a Ukrainian journalist turned lawmaker who staked his career on fighting corruption.
It used to be office of Paul Manafort.
This, he says, is where a potentially crucial bit of evidence was found, a suspicious invoice that appears to be personally signed by Paul Manafort.
So the person who put the accusation forward about Manafort was Sergei Lushenko.
Today I present the documents signed by Paul Manafort.
Lushenko, he has the image. I call it primitively inaccurate, the fighter of corruption.
The problem of corruption, this is a problem of the whole period of Ukrainian independence.
But he fights against corruption following orders. There is an order to fight with a corrupt person. He fights. If not, he does not. He has lost a lot of slander lawsuits directed against him. Because often, some of the information that he has presented, considering his authority as a journalist, is not simply implausible, it is deceitful. It was he who, as a member of parliament, as a former journalist, was instructed to make these records public from this ledger of the Party of Regions. The interesting fact of the matter is that when the story of the so-called Ledger of the Party of Regions came to light, and when he first reported about it, there was no mention of Paul Manafort. He spoke about other people. That is, there was a test run for the main strike. All this was done with one goal, to strike at the presidential candidate, Donald Trump. Why am I sure about this? I have good arguments for this. Because in this ledger, There were the names of hundreds of people for these 4 years. There were huge amounts, tens of millions of dollars, many tens of millions of dollars. There were specific people where not only their names were indicated, but also a personal signature that they received the money informally. No criminal cases have been investigated on these records yet. No one has been prosecuted. Hence, the conclusion is that this was done for a concentrated, focused strike against the main target. This main target, which was dictated from overseas, was called presidential candidate Donald Trump.